we have an amazing set of presentations for the next number of days. And so thank you for joining us here this morning. The chat should be available now if you do want to do that. Perfect. Thank you, Paula. If you are tweeting or you're doing anything, we have some social media pieces there. So feel free to use that hashtag. But we are very excited for this year. We have presentations coming from students from across Nova Scotia in different roles. And so it'll be a wonderful time together. I want to begin our time by acknowledging the land that I'm coming to you from. So I am living in the Annapolis Valley, also known as Gespukwik, in Mi'kma'ki, the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet people. We know that land acknowledgements is a growing important part of the call to reconciliation, and they can become a little bit stagnant. So I would invite you to just reflect on where you are, the land you are currently living in, and take a moment to consider what your role and our role together in reconciliation is. Acknowledging the land is not just meant to be an activity that we do or check off the list, but a moment to pause and reflect and acknowledge the spaces where we are. Thank you. So we have 3 presentations today, and I'm going to introduce our 3 panelists, and then I'm going to do it all up front, and then they are going to go and present one after another. There is a Q&A function, and so please feel free to write your questions throughout the presentations. We will have a time at the end to have a proper Q&A with the panelists, which will be great. And while they are offering different presentations on different topics, they are aligned in this first session being innovative methods and practices. So our first presenter, I'll introduce you all, and then Kristen, you can go. But our first presenter is Kristen Marshall. She's entering her 3rd year at St. FX, where she is pursuing a Bachelor of Science in Human Kinetics. This summer, Kristen worked as the Nova Scotia Works intern for the CEI, the Center for Employment Innovation, where she facilitated bi-weekly communities of learning for Nova Scotia Work interns from across Nova Scotia. So that's what she was doing this summer. And she will be our first presenter. Our second presenter is Hannah James. Hannah James is a student intern working with the CEI this summer and is the impact student intern. In this role, she's been developing a business case surrounding social impact assessment and relevance to career development. She is going into her fourth year at St. FX University and is doing a Bachelor of Science in Health programs. And our final presenter today is Jack Kennedy. Jack is currently a St. FX University student. We have good representation there. Hailing from Antigonish, Jack is entering his 4th year at St. FX with plans to earn a joint major in economics and finance. He's presently working as he worked at the CEI this summer and is filling the Future of Leadership internship role. So we have 3 amazing presenters with us this morning, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Kristen.
Thanks, Joel, for the introduction, and thank you all for joining today's panel. I'm super excited to be the first presenter, and I know we have a lot of great presentations over the next few days. I will share my screen, and hopefully you can all see it. Joel, can you see that?
Yes, you are good.
Okay, perfect. So today I will be presenting my work on communities of practice in practice, investigating the importance of shared learning. I'm actually just going to turn my camera off because it's cutting off some of my presentation. Okay, so just to get started, I want to give a quick agenda on what my presentation will look like today. So I will give you all an introduction to the research topic, followed by some background information, the value and importance, some findings, applications within the CEI, and then I'll finish with a case study looking at the communities of learning I hosted this summer. There we go. So I just wanted to give you all a definition to start get you thinking about what these spaces really are. There are many definitions in the literature, as there's not just one way to define these learning spaces. But how we define them in the CEI is groups of individuals who may share common practice, goals, interests, and/or visions that come together to enable a process of professional development and growth through sharing and collaboration. So I'll let you all sit on that for a couple minutes while I go through the next few things. So to introduce you all to the research topic, this summer I was looking at communities of practice, learning, and healing, and how we can look at best practices for sharing knowledge and information, solving problems, and applying learnings, with the goal of answering the question, how do we facilitate the best way to share knowledge, and what does that look like? The methods we used for this was a literature review, looking at all the different definitions and what else is out there and who's working on what. And in the next couple weeks, we'll be hosting a team engagement session with the Center for Employment Innovation, as well as one-on-one interviews with those who are directly involved in the facilitation or participation of these communities. As well as I looked at the survey data from the Nova Scotia Works interns who participated in these communities of learning over the last few summers. As I mentioned earlier, there really is no one definition that can be used. So I took pieces of multiple different definitions that I found and used them to kind of put together this general statement, which is groups of people who share a concern or passion, interact regularly with the goal of improving their knowledge, skills, or practice. So Etienne Wagner was credited with the official establishment or development of the term community of practice, and he identified 3 characteristics that are a necessity for these communities to be considered communities of practice and not just regular communities or meetings. So the way I broke down this statement into its 3 little sections helps to identify these 3 characteristics. So the first characteristic is called the domain, which is represented by the first part of the statement, groups of people who share a concern or passion. So having this shared domain of interest is what creates the commitment to the community that is necessary. And then the second characteristic is community, which is achieved through regular interactions. So you can see that from the second part of the statement there. This one is really important as a strong community promotes collaboration and encourages participation within the community. The third and final characteristic is practice, which refers to members of the community being actual practitioners of the domain. This is really important when we think about people wanting to represent their own lived experiences. It also ties in with the first characteristic of having that shared concern or passion. So in the third part of the statement, we can see the goal of improving their knowledge, skills, or practice. So what they're doing in their work is directly affected by the outcome of the learning that takes place in the community, which encourages participation and engagement. There are also many different terms for these spaces that I found through the literature. So maybe you might know them by a different name, but a few of them are communities of practice, learning, and healing, which we use frequently here at the CEI. Some others include knowledge stewarding communities, innovation clusters, frontiers of innovation, professional learning communities, and learning networks. So that's why it's so hard to have one definition for all of these learning spaces, because even though they accomplish the same goal, the way they go about it is slightly different. Another big question we had was, so what? What's the value? What's the importance? How can we find people that are using these, and what are they getting out of them? So Mamari identified 9 benefits of sharing best practices within an organization. So I'll go through those. The first one being it nurtures a learning culture. So really the whole center of these communities is that shared learning. So by introducing these collaborative processes, we're able to stimulate fluid conversations that allow for more engagement and participation. They also identify and fill knowledge gaps. This helps with improving productivity and personal and professional development, as they're able to share current knowledge that exists by having a space where common problems within the workplace can be identified and solved. And then it also generates creative and innovative ideas. So by enabling this dialogue to work on these problems, people are able to create new ideas and opportunities, as well as generate new knowledge to adapt to changes in the organization. And the way these communities are often structured, they're a lot more free-flowing and creative than a typical work meeting that some of us may be used to. So this also encourages that creativity. They also enable better decision-making within the workplace, as when we're able to learn from each other's failures and successes by sharing our experiences, we can work towards improving those in the future. And the more people you have giving input and sharing their opinions, you're going to get the best decision or choice possible. As well as, one thing I found interesting about this part was what these communities are doing is kind of encouraging the transition from the typical workplace structure that many of us may be used to more modern strategies. So instead of going to a meeting and having your boss sit at the front of the room and just go through their whole agenda without really asking for any input, the real goal of these learning spaces is to have everyone be an equal participant and share their experiences with one another. As I mentioned earlier, they also boost efficiency and competence. By stimulating learning, you're able to provide this effective space for collaboration, and you're able to share ideas, brainstorm, and collaborate in a more relaxed environment. It also helps to create a direct link between your learning and performance, as you can take something you learned from one person in that session and apply it directly to your work the next day. They also construct a supportive community. So I mentioned this earlier as a really big contributor to the success of these communities. As I'm sure we're all familiar with, the more you know people, the more likely you are to want to talk to them and share your ideas and your opinions. So by having the supportive community and connecting people who may not have connected otherwise, doing this through knowledge sharing is a great way to bring people together. It's also able to provide participants with an internal knowledge base. So by staying up to date with current policies, practices, and techniques, and also having that shared context for members to build an understanding of what's going on and making sure everyone's on the same page. These last two kind of go hand in hand with reducing the loss of know-how and cutting down the cost and time. So when we're able to use these communities to capture and retain knowledge, this information is made accessible for everybody. And so you don't have to spend time looking for it or teaching it to other people, because everyone is in that room and everyone is receiving the same information. So those were kind of 9 values or importance that I found, with some other examples of the really positive impact that these communities have had on organizations. So after analyzing the survey responses of the interns who participated in the communities of learning over the last few summers, there were some common themes that came up regarding their experiences in these communities and their overall thoughts. So some of the things that were recurring and multiple people shared that they enjoyed was being able to communicate their shared experiences, explore different perspectives on the same issue, be able to voice their concerns and their successes with their peers, feel validated in what they were experiencing, and increase feelings of support and connectedness during isolation. This was a really big one last year that came up, as many interns were still working from home because of the pandemic. And so they really weren't interacting with anyone their own age, right? Because you're basically in meetings all day with your supervisors and people that were older than you. So this community of learning project gave them an opportunity to connect to their peers and have those conversations in a less formal space, which really helped during those times of isolation, as well as being able to speak freely without fear of judgment. Sometimes it also can be hard when you're just starting out and you don't want to bug your boss with a million questions or feel like you're doing something wrong. And so this space was a great way for people to work together on their common problems or any issues they were having, and then feel more confident in their workplace. So to give you all some context on how the CEI applies these projects or these programs, I wanted to go through a few that are using them. So the New Opportunities for Work, or NOW program, was the first one within the CEI to use these communities of learning. And the goal of the program itself was to increase the labor force participation, attachment, and integration of underrepresented groups in Nova Scotia. The community of learning was used to share new learnings, best practices, challenges and solutions, and general ways to continue to improve the program as a whole. The Nova Scotia Works Diversity and Inclusion Program has the objective of having career service providers better reflect the communities they serve. This project actually utilizes multiple learning spaces to share knowledge. One community of learning includes the career practitioners who are hired through the program, while another is formed by the leaders of the program. There's also a community of practice with all Nova Scotia Works system leaders to take part in the learnings from this program. An important part about the Diversity and Inclusion Program is that a community of healing also emerged after the need for culturally relevant support, and the idea of healing as a crucial part of diversity and inclusion work was brought up by African Nova Scotians and persons of African descent in the Nova Scotia Works system. So that's a great example of how a need was identified through these communities of learning as multiple people bringing it up, and then they're able to create a separate space specifically for that, which is really the goal of these learning spaces. The Collective Impact for Inclusive Youth Employment Initiative, or the CIIYE initiative, seeks to provide meaningful employment and professional development opportunities for diverse young people in Nova Scotia. There are also multiple COL spaces for this initiative, one for the youth participants and another for the employers. And the good thing about this is obviously the youth in the program are going to have very different experiences and views than the people running the program. So it's important to get their perspectives so that we know the people running the programs can be like, okay, we can see that they're struggling with this, or this is what they want, and you're directly taking it from them, not from the outside looking in. So really the goal of the communities of learning in all of these projects is for participants and employers to share their successes, their failures, their learnings, and with each other to make sure we're continually evolving and elevating these programs. The last one I have on here is the Nova Scotia Works Interns, which I'll get into more detail about in the next slide. So I hosted bi-weekly communities of learning over the summer with the Nova Scotia Works interns across the province, where we discussed a variety of topics related to personal and professional development. These sessions were intern focused and intern facilitated, which is also a really important piece of the program. So the goal was, we had a couple goals of this. The first being to introduce interns to co-learning. So this was the first time that many, if not all of the interns had been introduced to this type of learning space. So it was really great to see them get engaged and open up their minds to a different way of learning. Also to improve personal and professional skills. So by sharing suggestions and ideas with their peers, having open floor discussions, as well as opportunities to participate in the organization and the delivery of the sessions if they wanted to, they were able to improve their communication skills and learn more about other things going on in the Nova Scotia Works system. Another big part of these communities of learning was to provide a learning opportunity for Nova Scotia Works and its partners. We're able to, so the supervisors also met every month to discuss how they can improve their internships. Because the goals we were talking about were then shared with them and then provided real-time learning for the system partners, as well as improving the connectedness of the Nova Scotia Works system itself. So some of the topics we discussed this summer included challenges people may be facing, communication skills and strategies, Marketing, outreach, and engagement. We had many interns who were organizing and hosting workshops over the summer, as well as creating social media content. And a lot of them were having the same struggles with participation and engagement. So it was really great for them to come together and work together on how they could improve that. We also looked at workload capacity and workplace stress. A lot of interns struggled with the transition from school to the workplace. And so we talked about how to balance multiple tasks, how to succeed in a busy environment, as well as how to manage and avoid stress in the workplace. We have our last session of the summer coming up this Thursday, where we'll talk about how to improve the internships going forward with a look back over the summer and what everyone accomplished, as well as what they would see to be important as being kept or changed in the future to make sure that the internship program is always evolving and improving. So the outcomes of this community of learning over the summer was resource and information sharing between interns. So throughout the summer, we used a shared OneDrive to create and share different documents with each other. So we had some on communication strategies, marketing tips, as well as how to manage workplace stress. And these documents were always available to everyone, and everyone was able to edit and add to them, as well as having breakout rooms to enable small group conversations where people could really talk one-on-one with each other about their specific challenges and or successes in the workplace, as well as a lot of suggestions for internships next year and how we can improve them. So overall, it was a really successful summer for these interns and for the program itself. So communities of practice, learning, and healing are emerging as a way for organizations to increase their productivity through the sharing of knowledge and best practices. This research is still continuing, as there is so much more to learn about the different ways people communicate in order to learn from one another. Thank you all for attending my presentation, and I look forward to answering your questions at the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Amazing, Kristen. Thank you so much. Thank you for starting our 2022 symposium off with such a well done and well thought out and a really exceptional presentation. Fantastic, actually. And those are the references there. Thank you. Again, for folks listening, feel free to input your questions in the Q&A. We will have a collective time at the end of after each panelist is gone, to be able to respond and be able to engage in some questions. So we will have a collective Q&A after Jack's presentation. Fantastic. Thank you again. So we will continue on with our panelists. Again, there is availability of the Q&A function to be able to input questions throughout as things percolate, as things come up, feel free to input there. But we are excited to have Hannah's presentation here next with us, and I'll leave it to her to introduce her topic and yeah, start us off. Thanks, Hannah.
Awesome. Thank you, Joel. And thank you, Kristen, for that great presentation. I think it was really good learnings. And I'm just going to make sure that you can see that screen, Joel.
Yes, you are good.
Okay, perfect. So like Joel said, I've been working this summer as the Impact Student Intern and working to develop a business case surrounding social impact assessment and its relevance to the Korean employment field. So my presentation today is talking about social impact assessment, the what, why, and how. So during my presentation today, I will be covering some of the following areas. I'll start off with a few key terms that will be important for the presentation and to understand social impact assessment more broadly. Then I'll go into a discussion of what is social impact assessment and some of the benefits of conducting these types of assessments, and then going into how to apply this and some of the best practices for organizations looking to conduct a social impact assessment, And then finally, having a discussion about how social impact assessment can fit into the career and employment field. So like I said, I'm going to start my presentation today off with some of the key terms that, again, will be important to understand throughout this presentation, but to also understand social impact assessments more broadly and to be able to consider how it could potentially apply to the work that you are doing. So to begin with, social impacts are any of the changes that an individual or community experiences as a result of external factors, whether those be programs, projects, or interventions. And these social impacts will encompass any and all potential impacts of a program, both positive and negative. Stakeholders are any of the individuals and/or communities that are involved or impacted by the program or organization being assessed. And then an output of a program would be any of the direct results of the activity that was undertaken, whether that be a program or an intervention. And these outputs will not necessarily indicate a lot about what the impact of the program was, but they will still provide some really key information about the program itself. And then finally, outcomes are any of the changes that stakeholders experienced as a result of their engagement with the activity. And these will be much more about the impact and what social impact assessments are really looking at. So now I'd like to move on to a discussion of what social impact assessments really are. And throughout the summer, I have found a number of definitions in the literature that has described what social impact assessments are. But the one that I've shared here today on the presentation is one that I found incredibly useful. So Bayer 2019 defines social impact assessments as the process of analyzing, monitoring, and managing the intended and unintended social consequences, both positive and negative, of planned interventions and any social change processes invoked by those interventions. And so this definition includes a lot of really important information, but it is really long and kind of makes the process a little more complicated, it seems, and it really is. And so social impact assessment really boils down to simply the process of measuring and analyzing any of the changes that stakeholders experience as the result of the activity, whether that be a program, a project, an intervention, etc. And so when we consider those two definitions, we can understand the main objective of social impact assessments as being able to better understand how a project or an organization is impacting the lives of the individuals and communities who engage with it. And so now I'd like to move into some of the benefits of social impact assessments for organizations who choose to conduct these assessments. And the first benefit I've chosen to highlight today is increased trust. And so social impact assessment is a process that is dependent on the engagement of stakeholders. And through their engagement, stakeholders will actually gain a really good understanding of the inner workings of the program, as well as the organization that's hosting the program. And this increase in understanding can result in an increased trust in both the program and the organization as well. And through this increased trust, stakeholders will often feel more comfortable sharing experiences and sharing opinions with the organization because they are feeling that the organization is genuinely interested and they trust that the organization is going to do something with this feedback. And this can make it easier for the organization to continue working with these individuals, whether that be through the social impact assessment process or potentially the continuation of other programs because of that previously built rapport. And it's important here to note, however, that organizations have to not only demonstrate a genuine want to hear the experiences and opinions of their stakeholders throughout the social impact assessment process, but they also need to follow up that demonstration with action. Because if stakeholders view organizations not responding to feedback or not taking feedback into consideration, it can break that trust. And that can kind of remove any of the benefits that were previously discussed. And so the next benefit I'd like to highlight is reduced costs and faster approvals. So by conducting a social impact assessment, organizations are demonstrating that they are already beginning to consider the impact that their work is having on stakeholders and other individuals, as well as acknowledging that they may have areas they need to improve upon. And this can lead to faster approvals in some situations from both governing bodies and funders, because those governing bodies and those funders are viewing organizations as having considered these impacts. It kind of takes out a step of the governing body or the funder having to say, like, have you considered these? Have you looked at these impacts? And it kind of just leads to a faster approval, and costs get reduced as well, because organizations are spending less time waiting for approvals or waiting for feedback from their governing bodies or their funders. And that just allows the ball to get rolling a lot quicker with these programs. The third benefit is opportunities to improve. So a key part of the social impact assessment process is the recognition that the data may show that the organization is falling short of expectations. And this is one reason that some organizations are hesitant to engage in social impact work. However, it's important that when doing social impact assessments and engaging with social impact work, organizations do not see these as failures, but rather as an opportunity for improvement. And when data indicates a potential issue or simply just a lack of impact, organizations are actually being presented with a really unique opportunity to actually adjust their program and tailor it to better impact their stakeholders and better serve those individuals. And so they just have to be willing to move past these potential failures or these falling short of expectation situations and make the necessary changes in order to better support their individuals and their stakeholders. And the final benefit I'd like to highlight today is the collection of relevant data. So social impact assessment involves the collection of data regarding impacts that stakeholders have experienced as a result of their engagement in the program or service. And by engaging in social impact work and collecting this data, organizations are able to receive a lot of really good first voice data and firsthand experiences, which they can then use to inform decisions regarding the program and to determine whether improvements need to be made or adjustments to certain aspects, or if certain aspects are working really well. And this data can just be used by both the organization and project team just to better serve the individuals and communities they are aiming to support. And then now moving into more of discussion about implementing social impact assessment and how to do that, I'd like to talk about some of the best practices for conducting a social impact assessment. So the first best practice is the use of mixed methods. So data is really important to organizations and communities alike, but in order for this data to be used effectively, it has to show the whole picture. And social impact assessments will often employ primarily quantitative methods due to the belief that the only way to measure impact was through the use of metrics. However, this can pose some issues because while quantitative data does provide some really key information regarding impact, it does not provide any context, which is incredibly important for actually understanding the impact that your program is having. And this is where qualitative data can come in and provide that necessary context so that an organization can fully understand the impact they are having. And so when conducting a social impact assessment, it's really important to employ kind of mixed methods and use both a mixture of qualitative to explain your quantitative data. The next best practice is community involvement. So a key aspect of the social impact assessment process is the involvement of all relevant stakeholders so that the organization is able to receive that first voice data that is so incredibly important. And so organizations have to engage all individuals and communities who are being impacted so that their opinions can be considered in these decisions and considered when looking at the program as a whole. And it's also really important that organizations take care to engage with individuals and communities who are traditionally excluded from decision-making processes to ensure that their perspectives are heard. And so it is important that organizations collect data that highlights the experiences of individuals rather than hiding it. And so this may mean that organizations have to collect data that might highlight those experiences. And it's important that organizations ensure that this process is interactive and that there's clear communication between the stakeholders and the organization. And the final best practice is measuring impact equity. And so it's important that organizations recognize that they can't just measure impact, but that they have to measure impact as it's felt by the different groups and the different individuals. And this is referred to as measuring the impact equity. And it is this important step in the social impact assessment process because not all groups or not all individuals will experience the same impact or the same level of impact. And so in order to best understand their impact, organizations have to again collect data that highlights the experiences of individuals rather than hiding it through things like aggregation or other data analysis processes. And so in order to ensure that any potential disparities are not masked by aggregation specifically, organizations need to collect and analyze data surrounding race, ethnicity, and gender and either identities, along with the impact that these individuals experienced, so that they can identify any potential disparities in the impacts that stakeholders are experiencing. And so now I'm going to start talking about how social impact assessment can be used in the career and employment field. And there's two main applications of this process to the career and employment field specifically. So to begin with, social impact assessments allow organizations and practitioners to examine their impact and to determine whether program goals were achieved. And so as discussed in previous slides, the main goal of a social impact assessment is to simply to examine the impact that an organization or program is having on their stakeholders. And this is the same for all fields, including the career and employment field. And so by conducting a social impact assessment, career development organizations are able to examine the impact they're having on participants in their programs or their services or even their projects. And by understanding this impact, the organization is able to make evidence-informed decisions about the continuation of this program and project or the implementation of a new program or project that fills potential gaps or continues to support stakeholders in the ways that they're identifying as most helpful. And this will be especially important if data is demonstrating that the program is potentially not meeting intended impacts or intended goals, so that the organization is able to make any necessary adjustments in order to better serve their stakeholders. And the second way that this can be used is that social impact assessments can provide organizations with the information that they need to demonstrate the need for and effectiveness of their program to funders. And so the information that is gathered during a social impact assessment, such as outcomes and indicators and long-term outcomes, can be especially useful for organizations that depend on funding from external sources, such as government, because the data that is gathered during this process can be used to demonstrate the effectiveness of the program, as well as the importance and why this program is so impactful. And in a study that was done by Lalonde and Magnuson, policymakers who were interviewed indicated that they wanted really specific outcomes of services, such as the client outcomes, indicators of those outcomes, and indicators that the services had an impact and that these impacts were persistent. And the major reason behind this want and this desire for this kind of outcome information was related to the need for evidence that justifies the spending required to continue career-related programs. And so this means that by conducting a social impact assessment, organizations are able to provide all of this information and more to their funders, whether that be government or other organizations, and really demonstrate why they're an important organization and why their programs need to continue in order to serve individuals and communities. And so this is a really important tool for career and employment related organizations. And I'd like to finish off my time here today with an example that I developed for the business case that can kind of help articulate how social impact assessment could be integrated into a career related program or organization. And so let us consider an interview preparation session. And so this session occurs on a one-on-one basis with a career development practitioner, kind of going through a mock interview with their participant, and they will ask common interview questions and help the individual become more comfortable answering those types of questions. And it will also involve the practitioner going over some of the key information to know when someone's undergoing an interview, such as the appropriate attire, the preparation, and tips and tricks. And so considering the language of outputs versus outcomes, we can apply that to this example as well. And so just as a reminder, outputs are the direct results of the activity, and these won't really indicate a lot about impact, whereas outcomes will be the actual changes that were experienced by stakeholders, and this is really what the impact is looking at. And so some potential outputs of this example would be the number of individuals who participate in this session and the number of individuals who gained employment following the session. And some potential outcomes on the short term would be an increased comfortability in an interview situation. And some potential indicators that would be used to track this outcome would be a self-reported increase in confidence during interviews and a self-reported decrease in anxiety prior to and during the interview itself. And then a final outcome would be professional growth, with the indicators being that participants will grow professionally, in part due to their new or improved employability skills, their experience, an increase in communication skills, and an increase in interview skills, such as preparation, active listening, and how to follow up, etc. And these outcomes, again, are short-term outcomes, and a social impact assessment could be used to determine long-term outcomes. But for this situation, I thought it would be better to focus on some of those short-term outcomes. And that is everything I have for you folks today. And thank you for listening to my presentation. And I hope that you learned something about social impact assessment and how it can apply to the field that we are all working in.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you for a very step-by-step process, and the example at the end about how we could apply it potentially to our work and the different things that we are involved in is wonderful. So thank you for that. Again, thank you for those who are putting questions in the Q&A. Continue to do that throughout, and we will have a time at the end to try to engage with those questions. Jack, you are next. Jack's presentation he's there. Here he is. Perfect. I will let him introduce his presentation, and following this, we will then enter into our Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Joel. I'm just going to share my screen here.
We can see your screen.
And you can see it, okay. Okay, hi everyone. Thank you to Hannah and Krista for going before me. And thank you to Joel for the introduction earlier on today. So my name is Jack Kennedy. I'm one of the CEI students this summer here at the Cody Institute. And today I'm going to be presenting my topic of participatory leadership development. I'm going to be walking everyone through this topic, following kind of a case study, which I went through this summer. So starting off here, I'll kind of give you a brief agenda of what I'm hoping to cover in my presentation today. So starting off, I'll kind of give you a general context and overview of the topic I went over this summer, build into the development process that we went through step by step, build that into some key outcomes that we hope to achieve through our project this summer, and then finally kind of end with where we are in terms of the current timeline and some of the next steps that are going to occur in the next coming months. Okay, so starting off, I'll just give you a brief context and overview of my topic here. So our partners at Nova Scotia Works system identified a need to deepen their leadership capacity. So if you don't know who Nova Scotia Works is, Nova Scotia Works offers a variety of employment services to help Nova Scotians understand, prepare for, and meet the needs of the provincial labor market. So a big part of our project this summer is working alongside them. So kind of the goal of our project this summer was to work alongside the Nova Scotia Works and through partnerships with the Nova Scotia Career Development and Employment Nova Scotia to provide the executive directors within the Nova Scotia Works system a leader development streamline program and to kind of identify some current discrepancies within the current operation. So this was kind of a general overview of the project that we were working on this summer, and I'll kind of go into more detail as I get farther into my presentation here. Okay, so just starting off with some current relevance. So in terms of leadership training, there's a lot of different explanations you can have behind the benefits of leadership training, but I've kind of broken down into the 5 that were most relevant for our summer programming here. So kind of to give you a definition here, in an ever-shifting work environment, finding ways to actively improve leadership capabilities and diligently seek out potential weaknesses greatly determines the potential for growth within a team and an organization. So as I said before, these are kind of relative to our project with Nova Scotia Works. These were kind of the 5 key areas we were hoping to develop within a leadership realm. So the first one being improved employee retention. So what we mean by this is that through leadership development, the kind of goal of this would be that by improving your leadership skills, you're more likely to retain top talent within your organization and have your employees stick around and work with you for a longer period of time, which is ideal as a leader in a team. The second output we were hoping to gain was enrich culture within the organization. So strong leadership kind of goes hand in hand with a strong culture. And our third and fourth point here, so these kind of go hand in hand together. So increased engagement, we were hoping through leadership development, some of the leaders at Nova Scotia Works could have increased engagement with their staff below them, which ultimately leads to more voices being heard, more voices contributing, which ultimately leads to improved innovation. Because when you're hearing more people talk, more people share their experiences, you're going to have more innovation. And then kind of finally, this major point here, professional growth. So our final goal here was to have professional growth in kind of 2 methods here. So as your leaders within the organization gain more leadership skills, they'll improve themselves from a professional standpoint, but also at the same time, they'll be benefiting those below them through these skills they develop. So what is meant by the term participatory development? So participatory development refers to the incorporation of local knowledge, skills, and resources to determine the content and desired outcomes of learnings. So kind of in a simpler term, participatory development means allowing those who are being affected by the training to play a big role in deciding what the content is and kind of what the end goals of the learnings are. So kind of why did we decide to use a participatory development model in this context? So kind of the main purpose was to develop a leadership development opportunities that are relevant and responsive to the needs of Nova Scotia work partners. So kind of as I said before, a big thing going into summer was we want to make sure that whatever we created as an output was something that was relevant and responsive to the needs of the EDs at Nova Scotia Works. We want to make sure that even if maybe there was previous leadership development that was effective somewhere else, we want to make sure that it would also be effective kind of in the particularly within the organization that it's specific to. And then kind of finally here, another reason why we decided to follow this method was to ensure that a variety of experiences and perspectives are shared and communicated to kind of avoid the prioritization of areas with low value. So we want to make sure that whatever we put out, those we worked with valued them at a high level. So we kind of have three main goals here. I've kind of summarized it here of implementation. So the first one being ensure the responsiveness to the needs of those involved. So we want to make sure, kind of as I previously said, that whatever we produced as an output was something that was currently valued and would actually be responsive to the needs that were presented to us. The second piece here was to enable individuals to play an active and influential role in the decision-making process. So we want to make sure that those involved were actively involved in terms of deciding the next steps, voting on what was prioritized, and so on. And kind of finally here, the third main goal was to encourage inclusivity and professional growth. So we want to make sure that the output of this project led to growth within those who it affected. So those are kind of the three summary points there, and I'll kind of move on now to the development process. So I've kind of put together this figure here, which kind of summarizes the process, and then I'll kind of look into each area from a more specific standpoint. So throughout their development process, we started with preliminary interviews. So these were one-on-one interviews. We conducted 16 of them. Then kind of based on these interviews, we moved into a priority survey release. And as a result of that, we came up with some primary topic and subtopic selections. And finally, we've kind of moved into more priority research and implementation era. So I'll go into more details with this, but if you guys kind of see at the bottom here, there's an analysis and communication tab between each process here. So what that really represents is between each step, there was a significant amount of analysis that had to take place. And also at the same time, the communication represents, we had multiple communication points with the EDs in terms of drop-in meetings and also just maintaining kind of an open line for communication. Okay, so starting off here, I'll kind of run you through our preliminary interview process. So this was kind of our first point of communication with the executive directors within the timeline. So these were semi-structured interviews with kind of 16 occurring over a 4-week period, kind of from early May to early June. And if you don't know what a semi-structured interview, it's kind of where we had set amount of questions that we wanted to go through, but we were also open to those being interviewed going off script a little bit because we did think there was some value behind that. Kind of within these interviews, we had really 3 main areas of focus. So the first one was a personalized conception of leadership. So we want to know what those leaders we were interviewing defined as leadership from their own experiences, and also we also want to know what they defined as effective leadership from a organizational standpoint. And the second point here, so this was where most of the content of the analysis came from, was leadership development possibilities in areas of learning interest. So we want to learn more about what the EDs thought was valuable to learn more about, and what were some of the areas that they were interested in learning more about. And then finally here, kind of the last element of the interview was some logistical components. So we thought it was important to learn more about learning styles so we could understand and kind of document how certain individuals like to learn and how that might kind of lead into the development process. And then we kind of had some final considerations. So timing, what time of the year would be ideal for this, and some other considerations. So I'll kind of run you through a brief overview of the analysis we did. So kind of the goal of this after we went through the interviews was to categorize the responses into common theme groups, because when there's so much data, we really wanted to get it to a point where it was more accessible to read and understand. So we categorized the responses into common theme groups for each question and identified a commonly occurring language within the interviews. So on our first round of analysis, we came up with 42 themes, which was still a lot, and kind of through a lot of coding and software usage, we actually brought it down to 10 themes. So kind of an example here below, one of our final themes we came up for development was team performance management. So that was actually the umbrella term we used. So that came down from staff collaboration enhancement, motivational leadership training, strength and weakness analysis, and staff engagement training. So we condensed those topics to one umbrella topic, which was team performance management. So that's just a kind of a brief example of how we organized and reduced our topics a little bit there. So these were the topics that came through after a final analysis. So these aren't in order. There's just how they're laid out. So the first topic was strategic succession planning, effective communication, equity, diversity, and inclusion, generational awareness, relationship building, inclusive and empathetic leadership, organizational awareness, team performance management, and human resource and organizational management. So kind of within all these topics, kind of summarizes what came out of interviews, what are areas that we think are values in terms of developing. Okay, and then kind of after that, we moved into our priority survey release. So after we had our topics, which I kind of just shared with you, we want to kind of next have a physical ranking in terms of how those were valued by the EDs. So the participants were asked to kind of select from a list of themes and sub-themes generated from their peers and rank them based on their personal perceived value and relevance to their professional careers. And kind of we kind of had two main goals through our surveys here. So the first one was to kind of, as I just said, gain a physical ranking of the leadership development priorities from the EDs. We thought this was really important. And then secondly here, to kind of gain data relative to leadership experience levels for future analysis. So we thought kind of a second level of analysis was to see if there was any connection between the level of experience between these leaders and the decisions they made in terms of their priorities. So that was another area we analyzed. And then this is kind of some more analysis. I'll describe this here for you. So these were the final rankings here in terms of how the EDs from Nova Scotia Works prioritized their learnings. So we had the general overbearing rankings in terms of the main topics, and then within those topics, we also had subtopics. So for example, here, if you look at our number 7th rank, effective communication, on average, it was, so for example, it was voted 7th 45.5% times and actually equated out to 7th overall. And within this topic, we also had some subtopics. So these were, we want to have more detail than just this is the topic we rank as the highest. So within effective communication, some of the subtopics include, for example, active listening, positive and engaging communication strategies. So we want to be able to have kind of a general level in terms of this is what is valued the highest, and then kind of within those different topics have more subtopics we could connect that to. And then kind of from there, we shared back these primary topic selections to the EDs. So kind of based on the previously shown results, the topic priorities and rankings were then shared back to the executive director group. And then as a result of this, we had some additional outcome meetings and feedback opportunities that were provided for final considerations. And after we kind of brought this all together, it's kind of where our primary research and design phase begins. So I'll now kind of go over the value achieved through this participatory design we went through and kind of the current timeline we're operating on. So there's kind of three main goals that I thought we achieved well this summer that we were looking to do. So the first one was the goals and content of programming were fully decided by the subjects of future learning. So all the content in terms of what was voted on, what was described, was fully created through the voices of the executive directors. So they had all the contributions in that area, which we from the very start we thought that was very important. The priorities and content selections were decided based on overall majority of perceived relevance while maintaining inclusivity. So we thought it was really important to make sure that each person involved in this training program had equal voting and equal value compared to the person next to them. We wanted to make sure that there was equivalence across all parties involved. And finally, the goal I also thought we achieved was providing multiple feedback opportunities and communication points to make sure we maintain quality control. So maintaining different forms of communication. So if these EDs had questions, if they had concerns, they could report back to us and we could kind of adjust to those concerns. And then this is kind of just a final timeline here. So I'll kind of run you through where we're currently operating. So as I said before, in May, we kind of launched our interviews, our preliminary interviews, which then led into the beginning of June. We then moved on to a variety of drop-in meetings, some research and consultation. And then finally here, we finished our survey. So kind of the next steps here, as we're kind of, if you see this pin just under August, we're currently kind of looking into the research aspects, consulting with partners around us to see who can provide and help us with some of these services we're looking to develop, and kind of moving into that more design process. And then kind of our goal as of now is moving into early September, maybe look into round 1 of our implementations and kind of update our timelines from there. And so, yeah, that's it for me. So thank you for everyone for listening to me. I hope you kind of gain some insight in terms of a participatory development model. And I'll pass that back to Joel here.
Thanks, Jack. And yeah, thanks for what a robust and like great process that you've gone through with that. It's amazing. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to invite the panelists, if you're able to turn on your camera, and we're going to enter into the Q&A session or time that we have allotted. So thank you for those who have asked questions. Feel free to continue to ask them throughout this time if anything's emerging or coming to mind. We want to engage with them as best as we can. The first question that I think we'll engage with is around communities of learning. So Kristen, obviously this is coming out of your presentation, but Jack and Hannah, feel free to hop in if you want. And I'm going to try to combine 2 questions, but in terms of thinking about hosting a learning space, whether it's a community of learning, community of practice, community of healing, are there particular skills or considerations to how to do that well? Kristen, maybe, and if others want to hop in, feel free.
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely challenging in the beginning. With hosting them online, you don't get that same experience of being in person and having like reading people's body language, and especially with people having their cameras off, a lot of the time you just feel like you're talking to yourself. So that's definitely a struggle, especially with new people and people that you don't know. But what I really tried to focus on in the beginning was a lot of different icebreaker activities and getting to know you and trying to build that connection and that sense of community online in a Zoom meeting, which is hard to do. And but yeah, I think the most important thing I learned was just kind of building that community from the start and really making that your main goal, because as much you can have as many questions prepared as you want or have an idea of how you want the session to go, but if your participants aren't engaging and aren't participating, you're not really getting anything out of it. So it's almost, looking back at it, I wish kind of in the beginning I had taken almost a whole session or half a session just to focus on almost team building within that environment, because that's definitely super important for these types of things. I think in terms of skills, just being able to, like, yes, you're the host and technically you're hosting the meeting, but at the same time you want everyone to feel like they can participate at any time. And so kind of stepping back at times and letting other people have discussions with one another is also super important. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that's kind of what I took from this summer.
I think that's great. Thank you. Thank you. And I'll ask a broad question for all three of you, because then we can engage with that. But based on, so the three different, all of you highlighted different kind of approaches and considerations around how to engage in different practices, which will support and enhance, whether it's service delivery or consideration of service delivery, or to create spaces. But while they're all different, there's a commonality across them all about the value and the importance of engaging with people, and not just in as saying a guise, but with really intentionality around elevating first voice and doing that well. So I was wondering if you could share about how to engage well with community, whether it's in the differing disciplines or tools that you were mentioning, but like how to bridge that gap or move towards community to be able to involve them in a community of practice, or to engage in social impact assessment, or to the development of this leadership development. What are kind of key principles or approaches to be able to engage community, or things to consider as well? I'll leave it open to whoever wants to take that first.
I can go first. I think through my research with the social impact, the biggest thing was kind of creating that trust between the organization and stakeholders, or like communities, because if the individuals and the communities don't feel like their perspectives are really going to be heard and like considered, then they might be hesitant to share it, because they kind of just see it as, if they're not going to listen to me, why bother? So I think the biggest thing is for the organization to really demonstrate that like they really want to hear this feedback and they really want this engagement, in order to show participants that like sharing your experiences aren't going to be a waste of time and we are going to consider them. I think is the biggest one that I found in my work.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, and with what I was doing too. People are more likely to share their experiences and tell you what's really going on if they know that it's going to result in change or someone's going to do something about it. People can talk about things all they want, but then if nothing happens, they're going to stop sharing eventually. So definitely building that trust, and then them being able to know that what they say is going to have a difference or make a change or be improved somehow.
Yeah, I kind of have really similar points to Hannah and Kristen there, but kind of through my experience, what I found was that a lot of the people that we were working alongside, they're so busy in their current active life and their work lives, that you got to make sure that you're providing value to them through your interaction. So I think it's really important that when you're engaging with them, that you're kind of providing an example that what you're working on is going to provide value to them in their professional career. So that was kind of the big thing for me.
That's actually a really lovely point, Jack. And that was kind of my next phase in this question, was when you think about engaging with executive directors, or engaging organizations, or engaging individuals to participate in the community of practice, like how do you, or what are important things to consider around the benefits, or how do you communicate the value add to them, Jack? So you kind of just mentioned that a little bit, but as you think about, and Hannah, I think everybody referenced it in some capacity in their presentation, but could you articulate like community engagement, or engaging humans at a large level period, just often it means more work, it means more energy, it takes more time, people are busy. So it's a challenge potentially for many of us in our roles. but what you're saying is that there's a lot of benefits for that work and that intentionality. So could you articulate some of the benefits for the individuals that you maybe interacted with, or potential organizations in the work and the practices you discussed?
I'll go first. I think for me, dealing with the interns, if we have a session where we're talking about a specific thing, and then it goes to their supervisors, and then it gets changed, it's like, okay, then the next time, like, oh, that was great. Or if they have problems, and then someone else at a different office across the province is also having the same issue, and then they're able to connect and talk to one another, and then you don't even have to go to your supervisor, and you're able to work together to solve those problems. I think that's where they see the real benefit in the learning space itself, when they actually are able to learn from one another and apply that to their work.
Yeah, I agree a lot with Kristen. Like a big part of the social impact assessment process is like engaging with stakeholders and identifying to them, like, here's how your participation will benefit not only the program, but like you. And like, if you're going to continue engaging in this program, if we can improve it and make it better, then you're going to also reap those benefits. And just articulating to them that their participation is going to have an impact, because I think that's where a lot of the value comes from. And if people see that they're having an impact, they're going to be more willing to continue engaging with that work.
I don't really have too much to add on that. I think Hannah and Kristen kind of covered most of the things I would probably say in that area pretty well. So
That's awesome. One question that came up for, and it's kind of connected to combining Paula's question and Jamie's question, but could you please share something from your research or from your experience over the summer that either surprised you about in the work that you're doing, whether it's specific to responses of those you were interviewing or just in your own research, or could you just share a moment that was like one of your most significant learnings that you're taking out of the summer? So either something that surprised you or one of your most significant learnings. Let's start with Jack, because everybody else is, if that's all right, Jack, to put you on the spot.
yeah, that's fine. I'll answer Paula's question then. So Paula asked, did any of the responses from the ED surprise you? I'd say the big thing for me kind of heading into the summer was my kind of overall knowledge of how the system around Nova Scotia Works was so limited that almost everything that I learned surprised me starting off. So kind of hearing different responses from, I interviewed up to 16 people, so hearing kind of different experiences from so many different locations, so many different organizations, all added so much value. So I wouldn't say there's a single instance, for example, that surprised me, but kind of just in general, kind of learning from each interview I had, so almost surprised me in its own way.
Yeah, I would say for me, kind of going into the summer, I felt like pretty confident in my like communication skills and being able to talk to people, and then being thrown into the whole new world of like online meetings and hosting these spaces with people that it was a challenge to learn how to communicate with people and engage them and get information from them that you want. Because it's hard when you sit there and you ask a question, and if you're in a room with someone, they're probably not just gonna like sit there and look at you and not say anything. But then when you're online and they all have their cameras off, and then you're just sitting there and no one's answering. So that was definitely something that I had to learn, and was definitely a big part of my summer.
Yeah, I think for my, like, the biggest learning that I took away was the importance of engaging with people and like seeing how, and like engaging with participants specifically, because I think that's a big part of social impact, is seeing how individuals are experienced and hearing those experiences from them specifically. Because I think a lot of times, at least in my experience in like school and stuff, there's a lot of like academics saying like, this is how it can impact people, or this is how things impact this community, whereas the importance of hearing from those impacted directly can kind of highlight completely different impacts or completely different perspectives. And so, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that I learned.
That's great. Lovely responses. Thanks for those questions. We'll ask one more question here, and then we will send people earlier out to lunch. But one of the things that, as we think about the work that you all three of you been doing and revolving around like career development and looking forward and how we can continue to enhance the services we're offering. As you think about your own professional career expectations and aspirations, is there, and maybe it's connected to the learnings that you've had, but is there something that you think that based on your experience from this summer or based on the work that you've done, that you're going to be potentially continuing to take into, whether it's school or your next career or whatever it might be, like whether it's a skill or a way of thinking that you'll be able to take into your next, your career as you continue to move forward?
I can start us off here. So I think like a big thing for me this summer was kind of developing communication skills. So Kristen kind of mentioned it earlier. So learning how to kind of communicate, whether that be on Zoom, through email, but also I found just communicating with such a wide variety of people that I normally wouldn't have the opportunity to communicate with was really valuable for me. So kind of getting to hear a lot of the voices, whether that be kind of within the CEI and a CDA, some of the different people I've got to meet with, I think that's really valuable, getting to kind of hear some experiences and backgrounds that I previously would never have got to experience. So I think that's something I'll take in my future, and I think it was really beneficial.
I can go next. I think like one of the biggest things I will continue doing is always making sure to engage with people. Like if I'm working with people and I want to know how something's impacting them, always making sure to go to them first before potentially looking at like secondary research. And like Jack said, to like having those good communication skills, I think is the other thing. And making sure that you're having clear communication with the people you're engaging with so that you can get that information as effectively as possible.
Yeah, I think for me, it kind of ties into what both Hannah and Jack said, just about like I had never really had any experience with these like communities of learning. I had never heard of them or participated in them, and now I've done a lot over the summer, and they're super interesting and a great way for people to share their knowledge. And also just kind of what Hannah said, like my first thought before this was always, if I want to know something, just look it up. But now it's like, oh, if I want to know something, I can just go ask someone who has that experience. And so that's something that I'll definitely be like focusing on and trying to be more conscious about moving forward.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, and again, thank you again to all the panelists for the amazing work you've done this summer, as well as the research. It's compelling. And as all you were presenting, I was taking notes and like, oh, this is really important. Oh, I need to incorporate this into my own practice. And so thank you for the ways that you are leading us in this space and the way you're contributed this summer. And I'm excited to see how the learnings can continue to be translated into the rest of your career in school. Thank you for those who have stayed in attendance with us during this Q&A. I really hope that you were able to take some pieces away from this, and there are a lot of promising pieces within these presentations. There will be a recording available. The timeline for that is varied, so please keep your eyes to that. And potentially we will try to make PowerPoints available on our website as well. The next session today starts at 1, and it's session 2. You can register for that on the CEI website. And that is three presentations focusing on inclusive and welcoming workplaces. So that again promises to be a very rich and amazing panel. So thank you again for coming and attending our first session of the 2022 symposium, and we hope to see you again. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.